Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting into part 4 of What If Spider-Man Spider Shadow, which concludes with the issue after this, with it being a 5-part series. And with part 4, it kind of falls into that usual part 4 or 5, like, well, okay, let's set the stage. But let me know what you guys think. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with this jumping right back in, like not long after Peter's fight with the Sinister Six, to where after that huge battle, Peter was separated from his symbiote in the fire, and with Jameson finding out and being fond of Peter Parker in this universe, like he actually likes the kid, he then takes Peter home, to where in that case Mary Jane and Felicia Hardy are there, which once again is another dangerous situation for Peter, having 2 exes with him in the same room. But it was also at this time that we found out, like before Wilson Fisk had died, he knew Spider-Man was going to come back and likely kill him, which he did, like he did exactly that. But once again, before Wilson Fisk had died, he found out Peter Parker was Spider-Man and he released that information to the world. So with Peter being brought back to his apartment now and them all just finding this out, police have now surrounded the whole building because Peter Parker is wanted for murder. And that's when Peter jumps up and puts on his regular suit. And let me say something here, because in the last issue, Peter was sitting in that chair looking like he was about to die. And I told you, like, he very much needed to do that. And I mean, of course he was weakened from the fight with the Sinister Six, but then when you come from that to getting home with your 2 exes in the same room, you gotta use all those excuses so you don't gotta get to talking. And that's exactly what Peter did here, because as soon as he heard the cops was outside, he was like, okay, it's time to go. And like suddenly he was able to speak clearly, get up, web sling and everything. But then it was here where Peter made the call for him to go and take care of the situation, but first everyone here needs to lay low. And to do so, he'll take Mary Jane home, and Felicia, she'll take Jameson home, which is a logical idea because Spider-Man and Black Cat are the only 2 here who can carry a body across the city, at least without walking through the front door. But with Peter saying this, it was very different than what everybody else had in their mind to do. Because for one, Felicia, she just wasn't feeling the whole idea of Peter leaving with Mary Jane. And Jameson, he was ready to put out a story to help Peter by putting out a cash reward for somebody who could catch the symbiote. But really the priority was just to get them out of there without being seen, because for one, once you got so many stars, it ain't but a matter of time for the choppers come through. And when that happens, your chances have then dropped to slim to none, because the helicopters, they got thermal imaging, and from there they're just following your heat signature, unless you just roll under a parked truck. But that's something a girl in high school told me. I never looked at it the same. And I definitely never tried it, so don't think that this is a how-to video. But while Peter's taking Mary Jane home, he then sees the Baxter building nearly covered with a symbiote, which immediately lets Peter know that his symbiote has gotten Reed Richards, and from there the symbiote is doing something super extra right now. And with seeing this, initially MJ tries to make Peter feel better by telling him it wasn't exactly his fault, but Peter knows that much of this is his responsibility because for one, he brought the symbiote here, but then on top of that, it kind of leans into the idea of if this symbiote is actually evil, or if that was something that the symbiote had inherited from Peter. And really with this idea, there's a number of ways that this could go, and mainly because since like 2018 up till now 2021, like there's been a lot of history added on to the symbiote, which could make an argument for why the symbiote could have started off evil, like with Venom First Host for example, to where we then found out that prior to Peter getting the symbiote, it was harvested from one of Knull's experimental planets and then weaponized in the Kree-Skrull War. But in this case with this story, which is a reimagining of Peter bringing back the symbiote from the first Secret Wars, like in this case we're given the idea that the symbiote was practically a blank slate, and the evil thoughts and feelings that the symbiote had expressed to Peter, that those were originally his thoughts and his feelings, because he always thought it would be easier to kill these villains who keep getting locked up and just keep coming back, which I'm sure plenty heroes think about. But then it's here also where MJ tells Peter like he's always had this dark side to him, which almost seems like in this case that Peter has perhaps an even darker side to him than your main 616 Peter Parker, which is what possibly tipped the scales here, but that's not necessarily the direction that it goes in. But MJ tells Peter that he's always had this really dark side to him, but as long as she's known him, he's fought against it and he's won. But with telling him this, she lets him know like don't feel bad because you got this suit that was like a drug that then twisted and manipulated what was already there, because without the suit, he's still the Peter Parker that his aunt and uncle had raised, and that's who's standing here right now. And with telling him this, MJ's like, go get him, Tiger. And it's here where we then go in closer, like just in front of the Baxter building, so we have the Avengers and Iron Man and like his Mark, what's that, Mark 8? Like the old school red and silver. But then also along with them, you got X Factor. And with seeing them, man, first I gotta say, this is one of my favorite suits that Cyclops ever had. And like, I don't have like a whole lot of physical copies of comic books because buying digital is just so much easier to keep up with, but I still got X Factor issue 66 sitting on my shelf right now. And I also remember I used to have this Cyclops action figure that had this like little button in the back to where you press it and his eyes light up. Man, I miss that thing. And I have no clue what happened to it, man. It's like you get older and some of your favorite toys just get raptured away. But while they're all here outside and they're kind of putting their plan together, and at this point they figure it's a hostage situation, but they can't really get any communications inside. And this is where Peter and MJ show up, and Peter's like, I know what it wants, and immediately Johnny goes off on him because Peter could have avoided this had he just taken off the symbiote when he stopped by before and just left it in containment with Reed. But Sue cuts all of that off because what they need to do is focus on how to get into this building. So when she then asks Spider-Man like what he knows as far as what he can share that can help them out, and it's here where he tells everyone that he knows that is vulnerable to fire, and Johnny can be a huge help with that. But aside from that, everyone else here, they also know what Johnny's filled them in on, which is practically secondhand info from Reed. And because this symbiote substance has been covering the whole building and shielding it against anything that Tony Stark could throw at it, they've more or less put together the idea that the symbiote has taken over Reed Richards and has used his intelligence to strengthen this symbiote substance that's covering the whole building. But at this point, it's really just their guess because nobody's been inside. But when Peter lets him know that he can feel the suit trying to tell him to come in, and Captain America tells him like, well, we know that thing controlled you, so I don't think it would be a good idea for you to just walk in there and just let that happen again. And when he says this, Peter takes off his mask and he looks Captain America in the eye and he tells him that he'll never let that thing take a hold of him again. And when saying that, Cap looks at him like, that's Cap. But then shortly after, Steve, he then agrees with the idea of letting Peter in because at this time there's really not a whole lot of options. But he also tells Peter that when he goes in, he needs to quickly either find a way to get those people out or quickly find a way to let the other heroes in, because if not, then they're gonna have to more or less just assume that he's just been taken too. But with going in, MJ tries to stop Peter and tell him like he really shouldn't do this alone. But Peter insists that he does because it's his responsibility. But as soon as he goes in, both MJ and Johnny zoom in right behind him, which for Johnny, I don't know why bringing him in was not a part of plan A. But then again, that's not really a guaranteed win because we saw what happened in King Black. But they don't know that because it was never their future in this world. But with Peter seeing the two of them rush in, initially he's mad, but then Johnny's like, okay, just get over it. And when he asks Peter if he has a plan, and more or less Peter's like, of course, just get up there and see what's going on. But while they're going back and forth, MJ, she also sees like the other people who are in the Baxter building and how they're still alive, but they've been bonded into like this trance, incoherent state. And at this time, Johnny creates a passageway through the elevator shaft for him and Peter to head up to the 33rd floor, while MJ, on the other hand, like she's in the get the strap mode. But before Peter goes up with Johnny, he tells MJ to stay down here because he really doesn't know exactly what the symbiote has up there waiting on him. But as Peter and Johnny are heading up to Reed's lab, through the elevator shaft, they're then suddenly attacked by Ben Grimm. But when he jumps down the elevator shaft, Johnny just gets out of the way by just punching through to an earlier floor. But Peter then takes the full brunt, which knocks him all the way down to the bottom. And it's crazy because even when he tries to crawl out, like Ben still grabs him. And he just gets to clobbering Peter. But then it's here where Peter kind of thinks of what MJ said as far as him having that darkness in him, and Peter then comes up with the idea to more or less use that into his favor, because for this Peter, when he's angry, he thinks less, and when he lets go, like the moves just come automatic. And he's able to do that here and without holding back, because when it's all said and done, this is still Ben Grimm. And Spider-Man is not just gonna punch him to death. But on the other hand, as far as Ben punches Spider-Man, like with a good enough punch, like I don't know, he might. And when Ben catches Peter with a good one, it almost looks like it for a second. But then when Peter bounces back, he's able to knock Ben out of the building, which he does intentionally in order to use the heroes outside, who he knows are ready to help. But also during the time that Peter was going back and forth with Ben, at this point Johnny has already made his way up to Reed's lab, and he's now face to face with the symbiote that has taken over Reed. And with this happening, it's not like the symbiote and Reed have come together, but instead the symbiote has just been using Reed's brain for knowledge in order to use Reed to save everyone like the symbiote believes that Peter wants him to do. And with doing this, he's got this suit to protect him like from fire, but also like we've seen before, this symbiote has already created its own offspring, but on top of that, he made sure that they're not vulnerable to fire. But also with the symbiote telling this to Johnny, he pushes a couple buttons on this board, and with doing this, there's like this huge blast that everyone sees coming from the Baxter building, which is also kind of like this obvious sign that like everything's not going great up top, but then also for us, kind of foreshadowing like, okay, get ready for something crazy. Because on the inside, as Peter is still getting up from his battle between him and Ben, he hears Johnny over the comms just trying to get back to him like, like, dude, where you at? Like, help me. Peter. Because right now Johnny's still alone going up against your symbiote Reed Richards, who in this case came out looking very different than what we'd seen with the Maker when he got his symbiote, or any of the cases where he's got a symbiote for that matter. But also here, we also got this unique case to where the symbiote is taken over, and it's the symbiote using Reed and speaking through him, rather than most of the time to where you see someone in a symbiote just being like an evil version of themselves. But it's also here where the symbiote grabs Johnny and like tells him like it would be a shame to kill him, because the symbiote could also feel how much Reed doesn't want it to kill Johnny. But before that goes any further, the symbiote is then shot in the back by MJ. And while this is happening, like Peter hears it all going over the comms, but before he can even tend to that, he also has the issue of all the other heroes who have now been taken over by the offspring of his symbiote as a result of it just pushing the button and letting all the babies out. Because now it's just symbiotes coming down from everywhere and just snatching heroes up. And for Peter, like after seeing this, like he doesn't know what he's gonna do. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.